Good day and welcome to glorious installment number 5 of the Gritty Tales writing vlog. I am your host, Hungle correspondent, and sole proprietor Tyler M Mathis, and today we'll be discussing a topic that intimidates many writers, and that is writing action. So, I've seen many posts in writing groups that go something like this. I need to write a fight scene, but I don't usually do those. Can anyone give me some advice? Well, if you've ever asked that question, then you are now in the right place, because I've written a hell of a lot of action over my career, and I'm talking from day one. So today we delve into writing action. Now, most of the examples I'm going to use involve violent action, that is, fights and battles. But these principles carry over to other action as well, such as chases, races, sporting contests, etc. Just keep in mind that this is a pretty broad primer to basically train you on writing action. I could go on about this for hours, but it's really not necessary. Much will be left unsaid. But I don't need to say it because after you listen to this, the basic primer, you'll be able to fill in your own blanks on anything I haven't covered. Now, first off, I don't really understand why a writer should be apprehensive about writing anything. Action, love scenes, what have you. You're a writer, aren't you? I mean, you should be able to do anything, and we learn by writing as well as studying writing. But more of an emphasis on learning by doing. But nevertheless, people who don't regularly write action tend to get a bit antsy at the prospect of it. If that's you, you just need to relax because writing action is not that hard. In fact, action scenes can be extremely fun because they're one of the few times a writer can really let his imagination off the chain, just spur of the moment to run wild. Intense action is very chaotic by nature, and I'm going to teach you how to adjust your writing style accordingly to write action that is seamless, entertaining, realistic, and of course, action-packed. Another question often asked in groups is whether to outline a story/scene or just wing it. Now, I tend to be an outliner, not for entire stories so much, but definitely for chapters and scenes. When I go to work, I generally have a lot of ordered notes ready to go before I start writing. But in action, a scene outline or flowchart of events or whatever you want to call it isn't so necessary. Since we're talking chaotic situations, you should leave a lot of open space for things to happen that occur to you spur of the moment. Most of the fun in the writing in writing is the creative process. And when that mental blast furnace is really cooking, you're going to have a blast writing the story. And action is the perfect vehicle for this. Now, whether you outline or wing an action scene, you still need a basic plan. That is, the key events that must be included. We need to know the objective, which side will win, and which of the important characters are going to be affected during the action, how they're going to be affected, and, to some degree, how it's going to play out in the aftermath. But that's less important for our purposes today. So then, armed with this knowledge of how events are going to play out, preferably in some kind of order, you just write the scene and basically go nuts. You don't have to know exactly how you'll get to the outcome and include the key events. You just have to get there and make those events happen somewhere. Basically, you just send your heroes in guns blazing and swords swinging and ad-lib all the non-scripted action. And if what you came up with spur of the moment doesn't suit you, you just go back and change it and rewrite, which we'll cover in a few. I mean, it really is simple, and those of you who run from action like a kid from the boogeyman are scared of exactly that, a figment of your imagination. And that's not a good thing, considering a fiction author's job revolves around those figments of imagination. In other words, the intimidation is all in your head. And if you're not familiar with action, you need to not only confront your apprehension, but embrace it like any other aspect of writing. Otherwise, you're just a writer of limited ability. And while we can't expect to master every aspect of writing, we must at least be competent at all of them. So buck up and learn to do what needs to be done. Let's talk about point of view, or better known as POV, in action scenes. Few writers these days compose in what is called the omniscient point of view, which is jumping back and forth between character POVs in a single scene, basically acting as an observing narrator instead of portraying action through a single character's eyes, which is called single POV. Those of you who use omniscient POV, you happy few, will have the luxury of describing as much of the action as you'd like. But even if you're mostly using single POV, as most of you probably do, the omniscient is something you can slip into from single POV, say during a massive battle between armies. That would be a good place to do it because, you know, these are events that cover often miles of countryside. So it's a little bit better to delve into all that in omniscient. As we'll cover later in this presentation, we don't need a blow-by-blow rundown of the action, and we'll often fast forward at certain points. So you can describe the battle starting and unfolding in single POV through the eyes of a couple different characters. Now you would insert scene breaks between each of those single POVs. But then, if you'd like, you can switch to the omniscient for a scene describing what's going on over the whole field of battle. This is one of the few times you can get away with switching from single POV to omniscient without it stinking like the proverbial fart in the spacesuit. But most of us are going to stick with single POV all the time, and when doing so in action, it should be a narrow, stress, narrow single POV. Only things and events the POV character could reasonably notice. If someone's fighting for their life or driving a car at 150 miles per hour, they're not going to be paying attention to much else. That's very important. Don't tell us during a bar fight, for example, what the guy's buddy way across the room is doing. The POV character, he wouldn't have any idea. And for the same reason, if the POV character only glances at something significant that may be happening in his field of vision, don't go nuts and describe it in detail. For one, this bogs down the flow of your action, which we'll get to. And secondly, he wouldn't see it well enough for you to describe it in great detail anyway. Keep your single POVs real and focused on what concerns the character, his immediate surroundings. Now, let's talk about choreography. A big mistake that some writers make in action, particularly in close combat, is choreographing the fight and providing blow-by-blow coverage. Now, you can detail a single fight move, but this is most effective for, as Shakespeare called them, swashing blows, better known as the coup de grace. If you're younger, think of it like a slow-motion finishing move in a video game like Mortal Kombat or whatever. Say we're writing a fight between Billy Joe Jim Bob and Joe Schmuckatelli. We might write something like, Billy Joe Jim Bob launched a vicious right cross, shattering Joe Schmuckatelli's jaw as a wrecking ball would an ice sculpture. Now, maybe that's a bad simile, but you get the point. However, we don't need to know the technical style of every punch Billy Joe Jim Bob throws throughout the fight. Same with Joe Schmuckatelli, naturally. We throw in only a couple of instances of described blows. Other than that, they're scrapping, trading punches, bobbing, weaving, grappling, tripping each other, whatever. Keep it vague for the most part. Otherwise, you'll sound like a fight caller at a boxing match, or or in the WWE, and you're going to bore your readers. And always remember, when writing fiction, any kind of fiction, particularly action, that too much of any literary technique or artifice will kill a scene. So what about gore? How much gore do we describe in detail in our action scenes? As with fight choreography, gore should be kept to a minimum, at least in my opinion. But there are exceptions to that, namely in the horror and military sci-fi genres. Readers of those genres like to see guts splattered often and in great detail. So if that's the sort of stuff you're writing, then you're probably a reader of it as well, and you should already know what to do. But if you're not writing in a genre where readers demand gore, then use it like any other aspect of action, sparingly and only when necessary. For an example of gore done sparingly and properly, I highly recommend my novella The Serpent Queen. You'll know when you get to the gory part, and you'll also notice we sequester gore in its proper place, unleashing it only when necessary. Action must receive careful attention during your rewrite, and I hope you're doing a rewrite. That's another topic for another day. So as far as rewriting action, I'll use myself as an example. On the first draft, I'll immerse myself in an action scene, kind of go nuts as I've told you, only to realize during a rewrite that I haven't described certain actions clearly enough, and others I've described in too much detail. We need to always question every aspect of our work during any rewrite, action scene or otherwise, to establish whether we're communicating properly with the reader in a style that is entertaining and properly paced. Our interests during rewrite are secondary. We already know how the story/scene ends, but we fail as authors if we can't describe things properly and wind up giving the reader too little or too much detail. Flow. Huge. Flow is key to action and must be carefully adjusted in rewrite. And I'm telling you right now, I'm sure there are a handful of writing prodigies in the world that don't need to rewrite. They're the Mozarts of the literary world. Chances are you're not one of them. And your action is going to require serious adjustment. Basically what we need in action is we need the hits to keep on coming. So there's very little space available for things like describing the character's thoughts during a melee or a car chase, or detailed descriptions of something huge happening in the POV character's line of sight while he's busy with other things. Say a grenade explodes 20 feet away from our hero during a brief break in the action. Let's say after he's just killed an opponent and he's looking for another. Sure, he might get a great look at some poor bastard getting blown apart by the grenade, but we don't want to describe it in too much detail. Grenade exploded, dude blasted apart, end of description. Unless you're writing military sci-fi, then it's vermilion blood spurting from severed limbs and meaty chunks of scorched flesh raining down all around our hero. But for the rest of us, get your POV character back in the fray and concentrating on his problems. The other events are just window dressing, just the occasional friendly reminder that our protagonist isn't alone in this fight. It's natural that we want to describe many facets of action, but from the single POV, always keeping your flow in mind We have to eliminate things like too much choreography, over-detailed descriptions, and thoughts the character wouldn't have while focusing solely on keeping his skin intact. So that's my primer on action writing. If you found this video enjoyable and helpful, please like and subscribe for more great writing advice from someone who's in the trenches pretty much every day fighting the writing battle. And please check out the links to my books and Amazon author page listed below this video. Read a few of my stories and you'll see that when it comes to action, I know what the hell I'm talking about. As always, thank you for watching. That is all.